Prohibition results in one city. Literary Digest, November 27, 1920. The precise effect of the passing of John Barleycorn on the average American community is a matter of wide and increasing public interest, and an investigation conducted by the Survey, New York, at the instance of Mr. Justice Louis D. Brandeis of the United States Supreme Court, the first considered and elaborate effort of its kind yet attempted, deserves, therefore, close attention. In Grand Rapids, where the study was made, investigators heard a well-nigh unanimous approval of prohibition. Here it is reported, the extinction of the liquor traffic has brought the manifold blessings of increased bank savings in the place of barroom wastage. Dance halls, once productive of immorality, have been turned into factories, shops, and educational centers. Health and recreation have become matters of first importance. Civic improvement goes hand in hand with charity and increased church attendance. The jail and county hospital are practically empty, and to women who had known only a vacant purse has come at last a heaven on earth. These, in brief, are the findings of the research made by Winthrop D. Lane of the New York Evening Post, formerly an associate editor of the Survey, and Bruno Lasker, an associate editor of the same magazine. Mr. Justice Brandeis wrote some time ago to the editors of the magazine that, "We shall soon have had a year of freedom from what have been regarded as the main causes of misery, unemployment, low wages, and drink," and asked, "What have been the gains from this first year of freedom? What further gain may be expected from the elimination of these causes? And what else must be done to make this a livable world?" The editors of the survey explain that Grand Rapids, a city of 138,000 population, was chosen for the study because it is a city in which prohibition has been in effect long enough to show results, where there was a variety of industrial employment, where the recent steady work period has not been affected by strikes, and where wages and living conditions reflected a broad belt of American life. It may be objected, the investigators readily admit, that it is difficult to determine what results are to be attributed to prohibition and what to prosperity due to higher wages. But they find their answer in the words of a woman who said, "I don't know what difference it would make what wages men got if the saloons were still open. They'd drink up all they earned." This view was found to be widespread. Prohibition ensured some of the benefits of higher wages by closing one avenue of wasteful expenditure. Grand Rapids went dry at midnight, April 30th, 1918, and since then, there is said to have been a steady decrease in crime and a general moral and material improvement. A glance at recorded crimes shows a reduction of 54% in the first year of Prohibition from the average of the 2 years immediately preceding, and of 45% in the second year. The average reduction for the 2 years of Prohibition was 49.8%. In other words, the amount of crime was almost cut in two. In April 1918, the month before Prohibition, there were 138 cases of intoxication in the police court. In May, the first month thereafter, 9. Before Prohibition, there were 160 saloons, and 40 or 50 halls were permitted to sell liquor under club license. Much immorality was bred in these halls, and when they were closed, a great sigh of relief seems literally to have gone up. Today, several of the halls are tobacco factories. One has been leased by a furniture factory, one is occupied by a tea store, and several soon are to be used by the Knights of Columbus as educational and recreational centers. Where lately were saloons are now billiard rooms, restaurants, stores, and branch banks. It will be of special interest to social workers to know that desertion shows a reduction from 33 during the 2 years before Prohibition to 14 during the 2 years after. Non-support from 82 to 53. Moreover, the jail has been all but empty a number of times since Prohibition went into effect. From 1909 to 1913, the smallest number of prisoners in the jail at any one time was 66, the largest 106. The records for 1919 and the first 6 months of 1920 show that the smallest number during that period was 9, the largest 38. For weeks, there were never more than 20. As one of the consequences of Prohibition, the police forces have been reduced 40%. "I tell you, my boy, Prohibition is a wonderful thing," said Chief of Police Albert A. Carroll, who in early life was a bartender. "There's lots of families in town that are better off than they ever were before. Take a man like Jim Dart," a fictitious name. Jim was the worst kind of an old soak, never had a cent, and now he's got $800 in the bank. High wages alone can't do that. Most of these fellows would spend their money on booze if they could get it, no matter what their wages were. But to the women whose husbands soaked their all in booze, Prohibition meant heaven on earth. Like a highlight stands out the story of one woman who bears witness to a common experience. Though they have been married many years, she and her husband date their wedded life from the day Prohibition went into effect. "You bet everything is different," she is quoted. "When folks ask me how long I've been married, I tell them 3 years. The other years are bygones, just as if they hadn't been. And now we go out together, and we have got our debts nearly paid. In 2 more paydays, we'll be even with the world, and we haven't been that before in our lives." And there was her husband's brother, who a month after Prohibition went out with his wife for the first time in 12 years. Holidays used to be the times they piped up. You bet his wife says life is different now. Prohibition, as well as better wages and plenty of employment, the investigators found, has helped business. People are meeting their obligations more promptly. In the words of an insurance agent, "There is no doubt that insurance is being purchased more freely now on account of increased prosperity and of Prohibition. Pawnshop transactions have been reduced by 33%, and that Prohibition has led directly to more and larger savings accounts in the banks of Grand Rapids is the testimony of several bankers. The first 3,600 accounts started with one of the banks which opened just prior to Prohibition averaged only $11, whereas the first account started with one of the banks which opened after Prohibition averaged $230. One banker specified mechanics who drank heavily, the sporting element, and waitresses as among those who have accounts in banks. As to the effect of Prohibition on workers in factories and shops, the investigators found a general agreement among employers that the good effects of Prohibition were distinctly noticeable. Now, Mondays are no longer blue or black. Absenteeism because of severe headaches has decreased, industrial accidents likewise. It seems true that when men don't drink, they think, and Philip, sober, has begun to realize that some men are worth more than others, to take a livelier interest in shop concerns, to express himself more freely and intelligently on the processes of which his work is a part. But the change has also made for restlessness, especially among the younger workers, and in some cases it has slackened effort and swelled the labor turnover. Faced with the necessity of retaining experienced employees, manufacturers are coming to study more closely the conditions of work and human relationships within the factory. An unquestioned growth is noticed in the popularity of outdoor sports, and fishing is so popular that the golden age of the angler seems to have returned. People pay more attention to their health now than they did even 3 or 4 years ago. They call physicians more readily and pay their bills more promptly, and with less apparent displeasure at the amount. But how much of this is due to Prohibition and how much to education and hygiene, larger incomes, and other causes, few doctors were ready to say. Contemporaneously with Prohibition, and perhaps due also to the war and to the psychology that brings people closer to their religious convictions during a time of stress and suffering, contributions to church and church attendance likewise showed an increase. But what has the passing of the bar meant to the fireside? The investigators answer. If the testimony of neighbors, friends, social workers, city officials, businessmen, ministers, in a word, of almost all of those with whom we came into contact, is worth anything, one can be fairly certain that in Grand Rapids, Prohibition has rehabilitated innumerable families, and has joined many husbands and wives, many fathers and children, in new bonds of association and happiness.